Zara looked up at him, her chest filled with a mix of fear and hope. Her father's confidence in her was all she needed. If he believed in her, maybe she could believe in herself a little more. She knew this was her chance to prove that her vision could work, to prove that the galaxy didn't have to be divided forever. "I'm ready," Zara said, her voice steady. "Let's do this." The council meeting was set to take place in the Grand Hall, a massive room with high ceilings and a floor made of polished stone. It was a place where important decisions were made, and today, Zara was determined to be heard. She and her father arrived early, and Zara immediately noticed how different the room felt this time. The council members were already seated at their long table, speaking in low voices, as if they were waiting for something or someone. When Zara and her father entered, every eye in the room turned to them. For a brief moment, she felt a wave of fear rush through her, but she pushed it aside. This was her moment. She couldn't afford to show weakness. She walked confidently to the front of the room, where a large display screen was already set up. The council members watched her closely, their faces unreadable. Vrax, the leader of the council, sat at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a hint of curiosity. Zara knew that he was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and if she could convince him, she could convince the others. "Zara," Vrax said, his voice calm but with an edge of authority. "We are here to hear what you have to say, but I must remind you that we have already made our decision. We've reviewed your ideas, and we believe they are too dangerous." Zara stood tall, meeting his gaze. "I understand your concerns, Vrax, but I ask you to look at the facts, not just your fears. The galaxy is suffering, species are fighting, and the resources are running out. If we continue down this path, the future will be filled with more conflict and division. I believe we can do better. I know we can do better." She pressed a button on the display screen, and a series of images appeared. Zara showed them maps of the galaxy, highlighting areas that had been devastated by war. She pointed to planets that had been left in ruins, populations decimated, and resources destroyed. She shared stories of species that had been forced to live in poverty while others hoarded wealth. The images were harsh, but they were necessary. The truth had to be seen. "The galaxy is on the brink," Zora continued. "We have the power to change it, but only if we come together. If we remain divided, the suffering will continue. If we choose unity, we can heal the wounds and build a better future for all of us." There was a long silence after Zora finished speaking. The council members exchanged looks, but no one said anything. Zara felt her heart race. She had done everything she could, but would it be enough? Finally, Vrax spoke. "Your vision is bold, Zara, but it is not an easy path. The galaxy is not ready for such drastic changes, and the cost of failure would be high." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She had known that the council would be hesitant, but hearing those words made everything feel so much more real. Failure could cost them everything, but she didn't back down. "We cannot wait for the perfect moment, Vrax. The longer we wait, the worse it will get. The galaxy is already falling apart. We need to act now." The room was still, the tension thick in the air. Zora could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had made her case, and now it was up to the council to decide what came next. Suddenly, a voice from the side spoke up. It was Raxus, the leader of the fleet who had joined Zora's cause. His deep, gravelly voice cut through the silence. "I've seen the truth of what Zora says," Raxus said, standing up. "I've led battles in the past, fought to protect my people, but I've also seen what happens when we remain divided. We cannot continue this way. It's only a matter of time before we destroy ourselves." Zora turned to Raxus, a sense of gratitude flooding her. She had known that he had experience, but hearing him speak so passionately made her believe that they could win. "I stand with Zora," Raxus continued, "and I believe we must change. If the council does not take action, I fear the galaxy will be lost." There was a murmur of surprise around the room. Zara could see the other council members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, They had never expected Raxus to support her. He was known for his strength and his skepticism toward new ideas. But here he was, standing with her. But instead, the child stood there, unafraid, staring into the eyes of the war beast as though they could see something inside it. The alien leaders could not explain what they were witnessing. Had the child tamed the beast? Or was this just a trick? They had never seen anything like this before. The war beast's growls became softer, its claws now gently scraping the floor. It slowly took another step back, its head tilting to the side. The child, still standing tall, reached out a hand towards the beast. They didn't say a word, but their eyes seemed to communicate something. A sense of calm, a sense of control. It was as if the child was telling the war beast that it didn't have to be violent. The creature hesitated. For a moment, it just stood there, staring at the child. The tension in the room grew thick. The aliens in the observation room leaned forward, not knowing what would happen next. This was not how the test was supposed to go. The war beast was supposed to attack. It was supposed to show that humans had no chance against the power of the alien creatures. But instead, the beast had become still, calm, almost confused. The child's hand reached out farther. They gently touched the war beast's snout, their fingers brushing against its smooth, scaly skin. The war beast didn't recoil. Instead, it closed its eyes, letting out a soft rumble. It was no longer a predator in that moment. It was something else, something more peaceful. The child had done the impossible. They had connected with the war beast, and for the first time, it seemed that the creature wasn't hungry anymore. It wasn't interested in hunting. The room was silent as the aliens watched, their minds racing. This was not part of the plan. They had not expected this outcome. They had brought the child here as a test, to see how they would react to fear and danger. But instead, the child had done the unimaginable. They had tamed the beast. The alien leaders were left speechless. They had underestimated humans. They had thought of them as weak, as fragile creatures, easily overpowered by the strength of the war beast. But now, they were beginning to realize that humans were something else entirely. The child had shown them that there was more to humans than they had thought. More strength, more resilience, more power than they could ever have imagined. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of alien technology that bathed the walls in an eerie light. High above, a huge metal door slowly began to open, and through it, a heavy, powerful growl echoed. The sound sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared listen. The war beast had been released from its holding chamber. Its immense body shifted in the shadows, its glowing red eyes piercing the darkness, and its every movement sent a wave of dread through the atmosphere. For the aliens watching from their observation room, this moment was the culmination of years of planning, years of research into human survival instincts, and years of testing. But this time, they were testing something different. They were testing the human child. The child stood at the center of the arena-like chamber, eyes wide, heart pounding. The cold, metallic floor beneath their feet was smooth, yet it felt as if it were made of steel under the weight of fear. They had been brought here by the aliens, who had studied humans for many years, and now they were going to be the subject of an experiment. The aliens had done this before, but never with a child. They had always chosen adults, strong warriors, or experts in combat, those who might have some chance of survival. But now, they had chosen a child, a small, defenseless human, believing that if this child could survive the war beast, it would prove just how fragile humans truly were. The war beast had been bred for one purpose: destruction. It was a creature of terror, capable of wiping out entire armies in moments. With its jagged scales, sharp claws, and piercing fangs, it was designed to be the ultimate predator. Its roar could shake the very ground, and its hunger was endless. The aliens were certain that nothing, not even a human child, could survive its onslaught. The beast took its first steps into the arena. Each movement was slow, deliberate, but full of power. Its claws scraped the floor as it walked forward, the sound sharp and chilling. The air was filled with the scent of its raw, animal hunger, and the child could feel the weight of it, the force of it pressing down on them. The child's heart raced, and their breath became shallow. Every instinct told them to run, to hide, to scream. But they did none of these things. Instead, they stood still, their body tense but unshaken. At the mention of creatures, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What kind of creatures were we talking about? The glowing plants around us seemed harmless enough, but I had a feeling that this planet held far more dangers than I could see. "Good luck," Professor Zor finished, and with that, his voice disappeared, leaving only the eerie silence behind. I turned to look at the others. A few of the students had already started moving, gathering their things and forming small groups. But there were also a few who were still standing, completely lost. No one had any idea where to go or what to do next. It seemed like the challenge had already begun. Figuring out how to make sense of this strange situation was the first obstacle. I knew I couldn't just stand there. The clock was ticking, and I had to take action. I wasn't the bravest person, but I had learned in the past that waiting around only made things worse. So I took a deep breath and decided to join one of the groups that was already moving. They looked like they had a plan, and maybe, just maybe, I could help them figure out what to do next. As I walked toward the group, I tried to focus on what Professor Zor had said. We had to make it to the central tower, but how? What kind of creatures were we going to face? And what dangers did the environment hold? I had so many questions, but there was no time to ask. All I could do was move forward and try to keep up. The group I joined was made up of 3 students. Dara, a quiet, serious girl who seemed like she knew what she was doing. Max, a loud and confident guy who always seemed to be at the center of attention. And Liam, a soft-spoken, thoughtful guy who was more of a strategist than a fighter. Dara and Max seemed to be taking charge, while Liam stayed mostly in the background, observing everything carefully. "We need to stick together," Dara said as she started walking. "We don't know what's out there, and we don't want to be caught off guard." "Agreed," Max added, looking around nervously. "This place gives me the creeps. Stay close." I fell into step behind them, trying to pay attention to everything around me. The planet was strange, but at the same time, it felt oddly familiar. The ground beneath my feet was solid, but there were patches of strange, glowing moss that seemed to pulse with energy. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of creatures lived in this place, and whether they were as dangerous as Professor Zor had made them sound. We walked for what felt like hours, moving through dense, alien forests and over rocky terrain. The silence was deafening, and every step we took felt like we were being watched. I kept expecting to see something jump out from the shadows, but nothing did. Still, the feeling of being watched never left. "We're getting closer," Dara said, glancing at a map she had pulled from her bag. "The central tower is just up ahead." I breathed a sigh of relief. We were getting somewhere. But as we neared the tower, something strange began to happen. The ground beneath us started to shake, and a low rumbling noise echoed through the air. I felt a jolt of panic shoot through my body. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know," Max said, his voice tight with fear. "Stay alert." Suddenly, the ground split open in front of us, revealing a large, shadowy figure rising from the earth. It was a massive creature, far bigger than anything I had expected. Its body was covered in rough, black scales, and its eyes glowed with an eerie red light. It had sharp claws that dug into the ground as it rose, and its teeth looked like they could tear through metal. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the creature Professor Zor had warned us about, and we were facing it alone. Dara immediately took charge, her voice sharp and commanding. "Stay calm. We need to fight this thing or find a way to escape." Max stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm not running from this thing. Let's take it down." But as much as I wanted to help, I didn't feel ready to face this monster. I had no idea how to fight something like this. But I also knew I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. My survival instincts kicked in, and I grabbed a nearby rock, ready to defend myself if needed. The creature roared, shaking the ground beneath our feet, and it lunged at us with terrifying speed. It was fast, and it was strong. We had to think quickly, or we wouldn't make it out alive. "Liam," Dara shouted, "do you have a plan?" Liam didn't answer at first. He was standing back, his mind working quickly as he assessed the situation. Then he looked up with a plan forming in his eyes. "Dara," Max, distracted. "I'll look for a weak point," he shouted, moving toward a nearby rock formation for cover. I had no idea if Liam's plan would work, but there was no time to question it. Dara and Max took off, moving quickly to engage the creature. Max was shouting at it, trying to get its attention, while Dara darted around, staying light on her feet. The creature turned, its attention fixed on them as it snarled. Liam motioned for me to follow him. "We have to find its weak spot," he whispered urgently. "Stay close." I nodded, my heart racing. The next few moments felt like a blur of adrenaline and fear. We darted around the creature, trying to find any weakness in its defenses. It wasn't easy. Its thick scales protected most of its body. But Liam seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He pointed to a gap between the creature's scales, just above its leg. "Now," Liam yelled. With everything I had, I threw the rock I had picked up, aiming for the gap. It hit the creature with a dull thud, but it was enough. The creature screamed in pain, turning its attention toward us. "We've got its attention," Liam shouted. "Now move." We ran, barely avoiding the creature's massive claws. This was only the beginning, but I realized something important in that moment. We could survive if we worked together. We didn't have all the answers, but by trusting each other and thinking quickly, we had managed to survive the first real test of this strange world. And this was just the beginning. The ground still shook beneath us as the creature roared in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop us. We had managed to land a hit, and for that brief moment we felt a spark of hope. But as the creature turned to face us, fury in its glowing red eyes, I realized that this was just the beginning of our challenges. Max was panting hard, his face flushed with adrenaline. "That thing is huge," he said, barely able to catch his breath. "How are we supposed to fight something like that?" Dara didn't look shaken at all. Her eyes were sharp, focused. "We don't need to fight it head-on," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the danger around us. "We need to outsmart it." Liam was already moving, looking for an escape route. He pointed to the left. "There's a canyon ahead. If we can make it there, we can regroup and figure out what to do next. But we have to move now." With no time to waste, we started running toward the canyon. Behind us, the creature screeched, and the ground trembled with every step it took. Its enormous claws scraped against the ground, and I could hear its breath growing louder as it gained on us. But we couldn't afford to stop. We had to keep going. As we ran, the rocky terrain made it difficult to keep our footing. The rocks were loose, and every step seemed to send them tumbling down the slope. I tried not to think about the creature chasing us. If we could just get to the canyon, we might have a chance to catch our breath and figure out our next move. Finally, we reached the canyon's edge, and we all stopped, panting heavily. The wide chasm stretched out before us, the rocky walls rising steeply on either side. It wasn't an ideal place to stop, but it was the only option we had. "We can't just stay here," Max said, still breathing hard. "That thing's going to catch us if we don't do something." "We need a plan," Dara said. "We can't just run forever. It's not about outrunning the creature. It's about using the terrain to our advantage." I looked over at the canyon. The walls were too steep to climb, but I noticed something strange. The ground around the canyon was covered in a strange, sticky substance. It wasn't mud, but it had the same texture. As I crouched down to take a closer look, I realized that it was something alive, like a thick web, but made of something that pulsed and moved on its own. "This stuff," I said, standing up and pointing at the strange material. "It's like a trap. I think it's trying to capture us." Liam looked at it closely. "It's a creature's web," he said, his voice filled with realization. "That explains the shaking earlier. The creature we just fought probably isn't the only thing out here. There are other dangers lurking." I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. If this web was some kind of trap, then there might be more creatures waiting for us. And if the creature we had just faced was anything to go by, we were in serious trouble. "We need to get out of this canyon before something else finds us," Dara said firmly. "If that creature comes this way, we'll be trapped." Without another word, we began to move quickly, but quietly, making our way along the edge of the canyon. The sticky web substance was everywhere, and it was starting to get thicker the farther we went. I could feel my heart racing as I kept my eyes on the ground, careful not to step into any of the webbing. I had no idea what would happen if I did, but I didn't want to find out. As we moved further along the canyon, the air grew colder, and the strange energy that had been humming around us began to grow stronger. I could feel it pressing down on me, like the planet itself was watching us. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was stronger now. We weren't alone. Suddenly, there was a noise, quiet at first, like the scraping of claws against stone. Then it got louder. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that the creature was closing in on us again. We had been running, but now we were trapped. There was nowhere to go. "We need to move now," Max shouted. We turned, ready to sprint, but before we could take another step, a loud screech filled the air. From the shadows of the canyon, something massive charged toward us. It was another creature, even bigger than the one we had just fought. Its body was covered in dark, leathery armor, and its eyes glowed an eerie yellow. It moved with terrifying speed, and it was coming straight for us. I froze for a moment, panic taking over. How were we supposed to fight something like this? "Run," Dara shouted. We bolted down the canyon, the creature hot on our heels. It was faster than the first one, and it seemed to know exactly where we were going. The sound of its claws scraping against the stone grew louder as it chased us, and I could feel the vibrations in the ground with every step it took. I pushed myself harder, trying to keep up with the others. My legs were burning, but I couldn't afford to stop. Not now. We reached a bend in the canyon, and I thought we might finally lose the creature. But when I rounded the corner, I saw something worse. There was another creature waiting for us. This one was smaller than the others, but it was just as deadly. It had sharp, glowing teeth and claws like knives, and it was blocking the way forward. "Go back," Liam shouted. "We can't go this way." We turned around, but the larger creature was already catching up. The canyon had become a maze of dead ends, and we were trapped in the middle of it. I didn't know what to do. There was no way out, and the creatures were closing in. Panic started to rise in my chest, but then I remembered what Dara had said earlier. We had to use the terrain to our advantage. Maybe the creatures knew this place better than we did, but we weren't completely powerless. "Over here," I shouted. I had noticed a narrow ledge on the side of the canyon wall. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. It was too narrow for the creatures to fit through, but it might be wide enough for us to climb. I reached for the wall and began to scramble up, hoping the others would follow. Max hesitated for a moment but quickly followed, his face tight with fear. Dara and Liam weren't far behind. We climbed up the rocky wall, our fingers scraping against the rough surface. The ledge was narrow, but it was just wide enough to keep us out of reach of the creatures below. The larger one screeched in frustration, but it couldn't get to us. Once we were all safely on the ledge, we stopped for a moment to catch our breath. We were safe, at least for now, but I could still hear the creatures growling below us, and the quiet hum of the strange energy was still pressing down on us. We hadn't escaped the danger. We had just delayed it. "We need to keep moving," Dara said after a few moments of silence. "This isn't over." She was right. We had barely survived our first dangerous encounter, and we still had to reach the central tower. But the creatures were out there, waiting for us. And now, the real challenge had just begun. This wasn't just about surviving the creatures. It was about surviving the planet itself. As we began to move again, I knew that this test would push us to our limits. But I also knew something else. If we stuck together, we might just have a chance to make it out of this alive. The ledge we had climbed to gave us a moment to catch our breath, but it also made me realize something I hadn't fully understood before. The test we were facing wasn't just about surviving the dangerous creatures or navigating this strange planet. It was something much deeper, something that hit closer to home. As we stood there, watching the creatures below growling in frustration, a quiet tension filled the air. We were safe for now, but I could feel the pressure building. The longer we stayed in this strange place, the more the emotional weight of it all started to sink in. We were far from home, stuck in a world full of unknown dangers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all slowly being pushed to our breaking points. Max was the first to speak. His voice was quieter than usual, and I could hear the weariness in it. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," he said, his eyes looking far away, as if he were talking more to himself than to us. I wanted to say something, to offer encouragement, but I wasn't sure what to say. I felt it too, the fear, the exhaustion, and the overwhelming weight of the unknown. But we had to keep going. We didn't have a choice. Dara, always the calm one, turned to us with a serious look. "We're not alone in this. We have each other. That's what's going to get us through." Her words were comforting, but they didn't completely erase the feeling of isolation I felt. It wasn't just the danger of the creatures that bothered me. It was the feeling that we were stranded, that no one knew where we were, and no one was coming to save us. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how out of control I felt. We were on our own. Liam seemed to understand what I was feeling, and without saying a word, he stepped closer to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder and gave me a reassuring squeeze. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that we weren't completely alone. We were in this together. I nodded, trying to push my worries aside. "You're right," I said quietly. "We just need to keep going. We'll make it out of here. We have to." But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true. I didn't know if we would make it out. I didn't know if we were ready for what was ahead. But I also knew that I couldn't let myself give up. Not yet. Not while we were still fighting. "We need to find a way to communicate with Professor Zor," Max said, breaking the silence. "He said we had to make it to the central tower, but I don't even know how to get there. This planet is huge, and we're running out of time." It was a good point. We didn't have any way of knowing where the tower was, or what else this planet had in store for us. All we knew was that the longer we stayed on the run, the more dangerous things seemed to get. "Let's keep moving," Dara said, her voice steady. "We've survived so far, and we can keep going. We just have to keep our heads on straight and think about our next move." I agreed with her. There was no point in standing around, worrying about things we couldn't control. The only thing we could control was how we responded to the challenges ahead. As we began to move again, I felt a strange sense of determination. I wasn't sure where that feeling came from, but it pushed me forward. I had to keep moving. If I stopped, if I allowed myself to get overwhelmed, then everything we had fought for so far would be for nothing. The canyon walls around us were steep, and the path ahead was narrow. The further we walked, the more I realized how quiet it had become. The creatures had stopped chasing us for now, but the silence was almost worse than the danger. It made everything feel more intense, more surreal, as if we were trapped in some strange dream, unable to wake up. "We're getting close to something," Liam said suddenly, his eyes scanning the landscape ahead. "I think I see something in the distance." We all stopped, turning our attention to the horizon. There, in the distance, I could see the faint outline of a large structure, tall, dark, and almost alien in its design. It had to be the central tower. I could feel a surge of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but we were closer than we had been. "We have to reach that tower," Dara said, her voice filled with purpose. "We'll find answers there." But even as she spoke, I couldn't shake the unease growing inside me. I had spent so much time focusing on the physical dangers of this place, on the creatures and the terrain, that I hadn't fully considered the emotional toll it was taking on all of us. We were constantly on edge, never knowing when the next threat would appear, or when one of us might falter under the pressure. The closer we got to the tower, the more the weight of it all seemed to bear down on me. I felt drained, both physically and emotionally. The fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, it was all starting to take its toll. I had always prided myself on being strong, on keeping my emotions in check. But here, on this alien planet, everything felt different. The challenges were no longer just physical. They were mental, emotional, and they were testing everything I thought I knew about myself. I glanced around at the others. Max, Dara, and Liam all seemed to be pushing through the exhaustion, but I could see the strain in their eyes. Max's usual confidence was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to grow with each step. Dara, who had always been calm under pressure, looked more tense than usual, her lips pressed into a thin line as she focused on the path ahead. And Liam, he was quieter than usual, his eyes darting around as if he were constantly searching for danger. We were all feeling it. The stress, the pressure, the fear. We weren't just fighting the creatures or the environment. We were fighting ourselves. I couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep this up. How long could we push forward before the emotional weight of it all broke us? It wasn't just about surviving the tests or passing the exam. It was about staying together, staying strong, and staying sane. As we reached the base of the tower, I felt a sense of relief. We had made it. But the journey wasn't over. We still had to face whatever came next, and I realized that, despite the fear and exhaustion, I wasn't alone. We were all in this together, and that was something I could hold on to. "This is it," Dara said, her voice firm, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. "We made it, but we don't know what's inside." We all stood there for a moment, looking up at the tower. The dark, looming structure seemed to tower over us, as if it were watching us. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, but at the same time, I felt a small glimmer of hope. We had made it this far. And no matter what came next, we would face it together. "This isn't just about surviving the planet," Liam said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. "It's about surviving ourselves. We have to trust each other." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the friends around me. We had been tested in ways we never could have imagined, but in the end, it was our bond, our ability to support each other, that had gotten us this far. The real challenge wasn't just the monsters or the planet. It was how we dealt with the emotional toll of it all. And as long as we stuck together, I knew we had a chance. "We can do this," Max said, his voice strong again, even though I could tell he was tired. "We've come too far to turn back now." With that, we stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead in the tower. And as we walked, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting for something more. For the people beside me, for the strength we shared, and for the hope that we could make it through this together. And that, I realized, was the true test. We stood at the base of the tower, gazing up at the towering structure. It loomed above us like a giant, dark sentinel, casting a long shadow over the landscape. The air around it felt charged, as though something was waiting to happen. My heart raced, not just from the physical exhaustion we had endured, but from the realization that we had made it this far. But it wasn't over yet. We still had to enter the tower, and whatever lay inside could be more dangerous than anything we'd faced so far. "We can't just stand here," Dara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but I could see the unease in her eyes. "We have to keep moving." Max nodded, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet resolve. "Yeah, we're too close now to turn back. Let's go." We exchanged looks, each of us silently agreeing that we couldn't afford to hesitate. We'd made it this far together, and we would face whatever came next as a team. That was the only way we could survive. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, my feet crunching on the rocky ground. The others followed closely behind, and we made our way to the entrance of the tower. The door was massive, almost like it had been built for giants. There were no handles, no buttons, nothing to suggest how to open it. But as we approached, a low hum filled the air, and the door slowly began to shift. It moved with a strange fluidity, almost as though it were alive. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. "Looks like we're expected," Liam said, his voice a little shaky but still filled with curiosity. "Let's see what's inside." The door opened fully, revealing a vast, empty hallway. The walls were made of smooth, dark metal that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The air inside was cold, and the silence was almost deafening. We hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. We had come so far, and there was no way we could leave without answers. As we stepped inside, the door closed behind us with a soft thud, sealing us in. We stood in the silence for a moment, just taking it all in. The hallway stretched ahead, and at the far end, we could see a faint glow, a light coming from somewhere deeper inside the tower. It was the only source of illumination, and it seemed to pull us toward it, as though the tower itself was guiding us forward. "Stay alert," Dara whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. "We don't know what we're dealing with." We nodded, and one by one, we began to move down the hallway. The air felt thick, as though we were walking through something more than just space. It was as if the very atmosphere of the tower was different, almost alive. It made me feel uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. We had no choice but to keep going. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every step we took echoed in the hall, making it feel like we weren't alone. I glanced at the others, but they were all focused on the path ahead, just as determined as I was to get to the end of this journey. The hallway twisted and turned, becoming more complex with each step. It was like a maze, and the walls seemed to shift, changing the way we moved forward. I couldn't tell if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the more we walked, the more disoriented I felt. Suddenly, the hall opened up into a massive chamber, and we were struck by the sight before us. The room was enormous, with a high ceiling that seemed to disappear into darkness. In the center of the room was a raised platform, glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. It was like something out of a dream. But it wasn't the beauty that caught my attention. It was the sense of power radiating from the platform. It was as if the entire room was pulsing with energy. "What is that?" Max whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know," I replied, my own voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't think we're alone here." As soon as the words left my mouth, the room seemed to come alive. The walls around us shifted, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating in my chest. The ground beneath our feet trembled, and I felt a sudden surge of fear. "It's a trap," Liam shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. The chamber suddenly erupted with a burst of light, blinding us for a moment. When the light faded, we saw it, the figure standing on the platform, cloaked in a shimmering, almost ethereal robe. It was an alien, but unlike anything we had ever seen before. Its skin was smooth and translucent, glowing faintly with the same light that filled the chamber. Its eyes were large and black, like endless pools of darkness, and it seemed to be watching us with an intense gaze. "Welcome," the alien said, its voice both distant and familiar, echoing through the room as though it came from everywhere at once. "I have been waiting for you." We froze, unsure of what to do or say. My heart raced in my chest, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It was as if it had the power to pull me in, to make me feel small and insignificant. "Who are you?" Dara asked, her voice steady, though I could hear the fear hidden beneath the calm exterior. "I am the one who has been testing you," the alien said, its voice resonating in my mind as much as it did in the air around us. "And you have passed the first challenge, but there is more to come." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I had thought the creatures, the traps, and the planet itself had been the challenges. But this was something else entirely. This was the turning point. This was the moment everything changed. The alien stepped forward, and the platform beneath it seemed to shift, lowering slightly. "You have come far," it said, its voice filled with a strange kind of reverence. "But you are not yet ready. You must face the ultimate test, not of your strength, but of your heart." I could feel the weight of the words pressing down on me. The ultimate test. What did that mean? "Your bonds will be tested," the alien continued, its eyes narrowing as it looked directly at us. "The choices you make here will determine not just your survival, but your future. The path ahead will be filled with doubt, fear, and confusion. But only those who can remain true to themselves will succeed." I glanced at the others, and I could see the confusion and fear in their eyes. We had come this far together, but now we were facing something even more dangerous. The test of our emotions, our trust in each other, and our very sense of self. "What do we have to do?" I asked, my voice shaky but firm. The alien didn't answer immediately. Instead, it raised its hand, and the chamber seemed to shift again. Suddenly, images flashed before my eyes. Memories, fears, and doubts. It was as if the alien was probing my mind, forcing me to confront everything I had been avoiding.